exhibition for the Portrait Gallery in London.
Okay, go ahead.
Right. So, this portrait of Charles Babbage was painted in 1845 by Samuel Lawrence and is now in the National Portrait Gallery in London. It was bequeathed to the gallery by Babbage's close friend Sir Edward Ryan, who died a few years after Babbage.
Okay, what we're going to do is, when we finish talking, we're just going to let this roll for a bit to give us 30 seconds more, whatever. Then we'll change the slide. I know that you won't have to talk through the whole thing.
Right.
Just, how are we doing? Okay.
As far as in terms of time?
Yeah, I think that gives us enough. Right. Okay.
Yes. Is it necessary to have a long exposure reach, or would you not be able to expand the
The main thing
time?
is, on some of the letters, where you
right.
indicate where the writing was, or what words were interesting.
Right.
That sort
Okay.
of thing.
Yes. So here, Augusta Ada, aged 27, when she wrote her brilliant paper on computer programming under Babbage's close supervision. Published 1843 with the initials AAL, concealing her identity.
What would you like to have for dinner? Chinese food? Italian
Yes,
food?
Chinese food is definitely my taste.
How about that? We'll just let this run for another 20 seconds or so. Because he talked a lot about her.
I was asking, is it necessary to have a long exposure? Would you not be able to copy even a brief exposure to expand to the length required?
When we were doing it before, there were long periods of time where you were actually addressing it. We
Yeah.
actually had it on tape.
Yes.
So what we have to do is cover that up because the
Yeah,
exposure.
yes, but my
it's
suggestion
not
was,
like
would not a brief exposure of a few seconds of a particular picture
It's
be
not like
sufficient to
film
make
work.
prolonged copies of
It's
it?
very hard to edit frame to frame a video without getting
Mhm.
bad splices.
Right.
That's one of the disadvantages.
So this is the largest program which Babbage supplied to illustrate Augusta Ada's paper for computing the sequence of Bernoulli numbers. She checked it carefully, pointed out some major bugs to Babbage, who humbly corrected it. And so this is the program as published in 1843 and recently verified by two Russian computer scientists, A.K. and A.L. Petrenko, who detected just one mistake and two misprints.
Wait a minute. Let's hold this is for 15 seconds. If you cut with this, easy to cut out. It's hard to edit frame to frame. We have to still frame. We could do some frame stores on these if we
Yeah,
wanted to,
yeah.
actually.
But that's you're dealing with
Well, this-
generation.
this
You
is-
don't have it in line. So.
Right.
This is an easy slide to get because this book's in the MIT library. Some of the others are hard.
Okay, let's go on there.
So here is a portrait of Babbage in 1860, when he was 69 years old. As the caption here says circa 1860, but on the original the penciled date of 1860 is clearly visible.
Let's hold this shot.
You took these yourself.
Yes.
What do you use for close-up equipment?
I just have an Asahi Pentax Spotmatic camera, and I just didn't have a close-up lens. I believe my standard lens to focus down to, what I think, 55 centimeters or 45 centimeters.
I think you never know what you run into. I guess you have to have everything ready in case you find something rare.
Mm-hmm.
Go with a whole bunch of close-up equipment just in case.
This we didn't get at all. The right-hand side of this was cut off. So let's concentrate on the right-hand side.
This is also, there's an original both in the MIT and Harvard libraries.
I think there's a separate slide of
Yeah.
slide of the machine.
There was a transparency which cut off about here.
Right.
Okay, this is good. We can go with this, but let's leave it on for a minute.
Yes, but this is much clearer than the transparency.
The Harvard library is odd. They have really rare books on the open shelf for you to borrow. I borrowed this first edition.
Yes, well, similarly at Newcastle upon Tyne, the first edition is on the open shelves in the library
There
there.
aren't many libraries that will do that.
Richard was talking about this kind of last week.
Yes, I know a couple of years ago I was examining some Darwin material in the Auckland Museum, and I was astonished to find a first edition of his Journal of Researches on the open shelves. Pointed out to the librarian. It was just...
I would be surprised if Harvard has one there too. When I was doing my research on the telephone company, I found original editions inscribed by Theodore Vail, who was the president and chairman of AT&T back in the turn of the century, who really made the company what it was. He gave his library to Harvard and MIT. It split between the two, and his name is autographed in each volume. MIT locked them up, but Harvard has them on the open shelf.
Incidentally, we were aware that McLaren, who was the creator of MIT, was a New Zealander.
I didn't know that. No. No.
He was educated in, what was it, Auckland, or I think it was Auckland. There's a chapel there named after him.
That's 1850, 60.
No, McLaren died about 1920 or so.
Yeah, but when did he come to the United States?
Well, I think it was late 19th century when MIT was a small technical school. And,
When MIT moved from Boston, it became MIT.
well, I don't think it's the move. The point is, when he arrived to become principal, MIT was a small technical school of just purely local significance.
MIT had its centenary about a couple of years ago, so it's 100 years old.
Yes, so although he didn't found it, it was he who built it from a purely local institution to a world-renowned
It was called
institution.
Boston Technical something or other.
So this fine engraving of Babbage was published with the obituary article in the Illustrated London News, November the 4th,
Now,
1871.
all this came from one book? No.
Some of these came from the Dover book, 1961, Charles Babbage's Calculating Engines.
The reprint of...
Well, that's a material mostly taken from the 1889 collection of Babbage's Calculating Engines. There are only a few pieces added from outside that collection. That 1889 volume is now being reprinted by the Charles Babbage Institute. Do you know of that?
Yeah, they're printing the whole series.
Yes, I've now joined the editorial board of that. And in particular, so the Institute is eager for me to edit a selection of Comrie's works, and I said I just cannot commit myself until the 18th
I was trying
edition.
to get... Didn't you tell me that Cumley worked at British intelligence during the war?
No,
I'm
he
thinking
did not.
Somebody else.
No, he was certainly working for the British and American governments on very large-scale military calculations.
But not
Oh
on
yes,
people.
sorry, he did. It was he wasn't directly with British intelligence, but once Harvey Jones had realised.
Babbage.
Oh yes. So this is a map published in Sydney in 1839 showing Mount Babbage and Mount Lyell, named by Thomas Livingston Mitchell on June the 26th, 1835. After 99 years, those names ceased to be used on maps, but I've asked the New South Wales government to restore the names of Mount Babbage and Mount Lyell to use. Yes, so I don't know that he was directly involved with British intelligence. Once R.V. Jones had detected the German radio beams, it was then Comrie who carried out the very extensive calculations so that from the scanty data available on radio beams, he was able to locate the transmitters. RAF reconnaissance planes photographed those spots, and there were the transmitters within 100 metres of where Comrie said they must be.
So could there have been any interaction between Comrie and Max Newman and Turing during that period in which he may have worked?
Probably not, because Comrie was killing himself with overwork. He was working his staff very hard, but three of his girls have told me they didn't mind because they knew that he was driving himself even harder and never asked any of them to do anything which he wouldn't willingly do himself. And so his very large-scale work, including the production of tables for anti-aircraft guns, of tables for bomb sites, he recomputed maps of Western Europe to link them up with British coordinates for artillery purposes. And so he, with the openly acknowledged projects on which he was working, were quite sufficient to take up the whole of his time and ruin his health, and so it's unlikely that he was working on Colossus.
Or any of those.
So this is Sir George Grey, who as a young explorer was befriended by Babbage, and they continued to correspond in a friendly manner for many years. And I mentioned in the lecture that on Babbage forwarded some books for Grey to give to a public library. They did so on several occasions, and indeed when Grey gave his colossal library to Cape Town in 1861 to found the South African Public Library, there are several books and papers by Babbage in the catalogue of his gift.
Could there be any artifacts in South Africa?
That is a possibility which I have considered. Probably not, because I don't know of any Babbage descendants there, and although I have the letters which Grey kept, Babbage forwarded books with them. He never speaks of sending any artifacts away. So this is a map of Western Australia showing Babbage Island off the present site of Carnarvon, named by Grey on the 6th of March 1839, in honour of Babbage, who had assisted him to explore Australia.
Did Babbage give him money?
No, but he seems to have used his influence with the Royal Geographical Society to get them to sponsor Grey's expeditions.
Babbage never travelled outside of Europe.
Never. He did consider coming over to Harvard with his friend Professor Reed, but decided against it, and indeed the ships struck an iceberg, and Professor Reed and his sister were not amongst the few people who fought their way onto the lifeboats. So Babbage published a moving tribute to his friend for the manner in which he calmly awaited his death on the sinking ship. So the Babbage River in northwest Canada was certainly named after Charles Babbage, because Herschel Island is offshore. Tomorrow morning I'll be taking a train to New Haven. Alfred van Sinderen, who's somebody fairly high up in Bell Telephones, I gather,
Yes.
is a collector of Babbage material and published a very useful bibliography of Babbage a couple of years ago. And he's going to introduce me to a number of people at Yale who are interested.
I wonder if he's related to the Van Sinderens who did something with Morgan. They may have been his partners. And there was a Van Sinderen a long time ago as a director of AT&T. Could be the same.
I have no idea.
They're a very
Yes.
wealthy family in Brooklyn.
Yes, the original slide is not clearly exposed
I
there.
see. Okay. Is that the back? Could you point that out one more time?
Yes, 55 kilometres east of the Alaskan border.
Thank
We
you.
have
Yes.
a,
When I gave a lecture on Babbage at the University of Essex last year, one of the computer scientists there, this is a map of the moon showing Mount Babbage at latitude 58 degrees north, 52 degrees west, if I can find it. This is centred on the north pole of the moon. Somewhere there. Well, it's in that general region at any rate.
who named it Babbage?
English astronomer W.R. Burt in 1862, he pointed out that an atlas of the moon just published had missed out a few prominent craters, so took the occasion to name them after various people, including Charles Babbage. And it was specifically in honour of a geological paper by Babbage, in which he gave some speculations about the lunar surface. This is Henry Monson, a neighbour of Babbage in London, born the same year as himself, and a prosperous builder, but when he was ruined in the Depression of 1847, Babbage went to much trouble to help him and his Monson and his family emigrate to New Zealand. This is a map of New Zealand. We can go quickly on. This is only a general map. No, this is the button to press. Walter Baldock Durrant Mantell, son of the famous discoverer of dinosaurs, Dr. Gideon Algernon Mantell, who ran away to New Zealand at the age of 19, and the Mantell papers in the Alexander Turnbull Library include a letter from Babbage to Walter's father, Dr. Gideon Algernon Mantell. So that, incidentally, is one of the richest collections of papers anywhere for the natural sciences in the first half of the 19th century, practically unknown. Next, only a few people have looked for scientific historical material in New Zealand, but we've found so much that we'll be speaking about at a conference next month in Wellington. And IBM New Zealand are sponsoring my contribution to that conference. So this is an aerial view of Whanganui, the town around the lower reaches of the Whanganui River, and I took this as I was returning to my hometown for the first time since I left at the age of 5. Well, see, it's on the west coast, off the main north-south transport route, and simply never had occasion to go back. This is one of the documents in the Whanganui Museum, a handwritten copy of an advertisement in the Times of the 3rd of March 1835, which some rival inventor offered simple difference engines at £40 apiece. How can we make such a comparison? How much does a southern black slave cost in $1983? What meaning does such a question have?
Well, what did the average computer program make in 1755 per year? That's just like the ads you see in Byte today. Equipment doesn't exist. You get a few customers, then you make it.
This is an obituary article from the Whanganui Herald in October the 20th, 1923, for Charles Whitmore Babbage. Very proud of the fact that he was the eldest son of the eldest son of Charles Babbage, etc. As this also mentions that, as well as the Astronomical Society and Camera Society, he was a foundation member of the devoted much time to beautifying Whanganui, which means that he must be largely to blame for many of the Victorian statues littering the town of Whanganui. By a curious coincidence, the largest computer in New Zealand is based at Whanganui, a police computer used largely by the Secret Service and police. And there's actually people with official names such as Whanganui Computer Supervisor, and there's Parliament passes bills about the Whanganui computer.
Is it a secret computer?
Yes,
It's just generally
very, very secret. So it's run by the secret police. Well, the government assured everyone it was for keeping place of car registration numbers, etc. But it soon became clear that it's used largely by the secret police. And there's reliable reports that the CIA has a hotline directly into it for reading out from it.
I recall that you pointed out a passage from this that you read from.
Yes, Mr. Babbage was very proud of the fact that he was the eldest son of Charles Babbage, the eminent mathematician and inventor of Babbage's calculating engine, etc.
That's all. Great, thank you.
Mm.
That's it out. Good.
So in the Whanganui Museum collection is the manuscript of passages from the life of a philosopher. This page, Babbage explained double-length arithmetic in detail and then went on to discuss multiple-length arithmetic. As he designed the store to have 50 decimal arithmetic with 50 digits per number. Babbage did actually consider many other bases of arithmetic, ranging from 2 to 100, but settled upon 10 as the most convenient. Well, 12 would be mechanically more convenient, but then there'd be the nuisance of conversion between base 10 and base 12. Here, Babbage starts a very long-winded explanation of how a conditional jump could be performed in a program in response to an inquiry from Professor Massotti as to how the machine could distinguish between two or more courses of action.
Thank you.
And after several pages of quite irrelevant and complicated mathematics, he represents the contents of a register being subtracted below zero, and the subtraction carry giving a chain of nines, and when the subtraction carry drops off the top, it moves the lever which switches control of the program from one routine on cards to another. Anyway, so Thursday morning, Van Sinderen's going to drive me through to IBM at Yorktown Heights, where I'll give a lecture there.
Very good.
And Friday I'd set aside as a day of rest, and I'll be visiting a friend in New York over the weekend.
And then do you head back?
So here in the manuscript corresponding to page 136 of the 1864 edition, he tells his only mention of Ada Augusta, the late Countess of Lovelace, Ada Augusta, Countess of Lovelace, the only child of the poet Byron. And then Babbage stressed this point, that the whole of the developments and operations of analysis are now capable of being executed by machinery. Yes. That's the carpet on the floor of my hotel, by the way. The museum director invited me to take the carton to my hotel to work on over the weekend, and went to great trouble to arrange for a Xerox copier to be available for me to use over the weekend. You see, the museum was open for only the afternoons of Saturday and Sunday, and there's only a crude photocopier there. So I photocopied many hundreds of pages in Whanganui and Auckland, kept one set for myself, sent another set to the Science Museum in London, and another set to the Charles Babbage Institute at the University of Minnesota. So this is Mrs. Jean Babbage's fragment of the difference engine, one of 6 fragments assembled in 1879 by Henry Percival Babbage, and this one had been gathering rust, dust and cobwebs for the past century in farm barns in New Zealand. This is a copy made for Babbage of a letter which he had received from Edvard Scheutz in Stockholm, and facing it is a copy of a similar letter of thanks from Edvard's father, George Scheutz.
How would that copy be made?
Well, it's a neat copperplate handwriting, so some secretary presumably wrote it out for Babbage. He was so justifiably proud of those letters that, as well as keeping the originals now in the British Library, he had this large sheet of paper used to have copperplate copies made of them.
I see.
This is a brief note from Augusta Ada Lovelace, sent to Babbage in about 1840 or 1841. The pencilled annotations here were probably written by Henry Babbage, but might be have been written by Charles. Their handwritings are not always easy to distinguish. Richard, you have Anthony Hyman's book, I presume, have you?
Oh yes.
Yes, I've reviewed it very enthusiastically for computing reviews. This is a later letter from Augusta Ada on the 10th of January 1847 to Babbage. After 13 years of close friendship, she could address him as Dear Babbage. And at the end, she could sign herself Ever Yours A.L., which was a very familiar form of address. Correction, the date was January the 16th, 1847.
So far, nothing surprising has come out of any of these discoveries that we didn't know. Just confirmation, or would you say otherwise?
Well, that advertisement is very mysterious indeed. So Brian Randall's written a paper about it, which is scheduled to be published together with mine in the Annals of the History of Computing. I mean, the fragment of the difference engines. So this is a negative of Benjamin Herschel Babbage's original drawing of the 1833 fragment.
Is that a
Of the
photograph negative or a blueprint negative?
No, so this is the original negative, which I took of the original drawing.
Oh, okay.
That's why no point in getting a positive slide
The
made.
original drawing.
The original drawing is in Mrs. Jean Babbage. Well, she already had several prints from it, one very worm-eaten print she had had framed. I point out to her that this is the original drawing.
She has a very good glass case.
And so she borrowed my pencil and noted on it original drawing. Yes, this is a letter to Charles Babbage written in 1831 by the Secretary of the Royal Society, a very frosty letter indeed, sternly demanding that Babbage return 2 books which are overdue from the library. That was the year after he set out to destroy the Royal Society by publishing The Decline of Science in England. But he still kept his privilege as a fellow, including borrowing books from the library. This is a hitherto unknown lithographed portrait of Charles Babbage made in 1821, when he was aged 29, made his first visit to Italy, and in the same year invented the difference engine. Rescued just as it was about to be thrown into a rubbish heap by a teenaged descendant of Babbage.
We proof a new paper.
is much better. Yeah, maybe
So this is one of two off-prints of Augusta Ada's 1843 paper held by Dr. Stuart Barton Babbage in Sydney. This particular copy on a facing page is signed by Benjamin Herschel Babbage. 100 off-prints were sent by the publisher to Augusta Ada through Babbage. That looks like a blemish on the slide. I don't recall seeing that blob before.
Does anyone compare the original Italian to the translation?
Yes, I think it was Alan Bromley found one mistranslation that the case n equals infinity. It's printed as cos n equals infinity. Well, I don't think we can blame her for her, because a reader a mathematical reader automatically make the correction and hardly notice the misprint. So here in amongst a huge album of diplomas of Charles Babbage held by Dr. Stuart Martin Babbage is a certificate signed by several dons of Trinity in 1814 that Babbage was a fit person to become a deacon of the Anglican Church, but because his father refused to supply the capital to invest in buying a college living as a clergyman, he left blank the title and diocese of the bishop to whom the application was to be made.
It's like buying a municipal bond.
Hmm?
Pay back, is that what it was?
Oh yeah, well, see, that was the largest reliable interest to be obtained on a sum of money in that period by investing it, by buying a post as a clergyman, pay about 10% of the income to the vicar. I mean, a vicar, that's what it speaks of vicarious satisfaction. The clergyman would be living it up in the flesh pots of town, whilst a poor, starving clergyman would be vicariously carrying out the duties of the incumbent. This is the certificate from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts on the 25th day of January 1832, making Charles Babbage a Fellow of the Society, signed by Asa Gray, Nathan Hale, Nathaniel Bowditch, and Josiah Quincy.
How did that come about?
Well, Babbage was greatly admired by Joseph Henry, who visited him a few years later. Henry isn't one of the four people signing, but...
I wonder if there's anything at the American Academy is just across the... I wonder if there's anything there.
of course it is here. So, Cambridge.
Oh, I'm thinking of the Massachusetts Historical Society, right? The American Academy's near where you live.
Yeah.
Not to be outdone, the St. Petersburg Academy, a few months later, elected Babbage as a fellow of the Imperial Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg, signed by Sergei Uvarov as president and P.N. Fuss as secretary. Fuss had married a daughter of Euler, a great mathematician.
It's real. It's all in Roman.
Dr. Neville Francis Babbage in Sydney has these miniature portraits of Charles Babbage and of his fiancée, painted in 1813, the year before their marriage. This is a copy made in 1925 of a portrait of Charles's father as a young man. the lady is a non-Babbage ancestor of Dr. Neville Francis Babbage. This is a large bronze medal awarded to Charles Babbage by an Italian scientific society, held by Dr. Neville Francis Babbage, who also has some of Charles's books inscribed by himself. And here, on display in the McLaren Museum at the University of Sydney, are 10 loose parts of the analytical engine and of the difference engine presented by Dr. Neville Francis Babbage. Clearly labelled as such, yet they had remained almost unknown until recently.
Feeling that if they built this successfully and then built another 10 or 15, they would have had a vested interest in making gears like that, and highly resisted anybody coming in with electromagnetic relays and vacuum tubes. It would have bought the
Yes, well,
patents
Babbage
and
did study some publications by some Italians about introducing electrical contacts into jacquard looms, but he didn't follow it up. And in view of the primitive state of electrical technology at the time, it's probably wise not to commit himself to that.
Somebody at the conference pointed out that they couldn't have generated enough electricity